Welcome back to another DF Architect video. As you've seen from the intro, I'm going to show you how to create those images which have been extracted from the Lumion model. And if you want to know a little bit more about how to create that Lumion model, you can have a look at the previous video, which essentially shows you how to create the model from scratch. It's a time-lapse video running through some of the landscape tools that you can use in Lumion. And what I want to focus in this video is showing you how to render images from Lumion and bringing it into Photoshop and then into Krea for AI upscaling. So when you're creating views in Lumion, it's very easy. There are some pre-built custom presets that you can use, but you can also customize those as needed. There's a huge menu to choose from where you can customize your presets and copy them from one view to another. The custom presets as they come are pretty good, but you can amend as I've mentioned. So you can change all sorts of things like the tonality, the depth, the warmth of the image. You can also change some of the focal length and color tones. You can add people and habitation, vegetation. I always recommend to use HDRI whenever possible because the idea of a HDRI is essentially a 360 image which sort of comes with all its color and lighting conditions, so it helps change the tone of your image and makes it look a little bit more realistic and not just sort of sharp colors. It also gives you some really nice skies, but in this case for this image I chose a clear sky so I can amend the look in Photoshop. And you can also choose what way you want to render. In the latest versions of Lumion, you can use ray tracing, but in the older versions, you can just choose the basic sort of render functions and the output, whether you want it to be 4K or 1080 and so on. But a really important note is when you are exporting from Lumion, I always export the different layers. More specifically, I export the depth, sky alpha, and material ID and object ID because they will help you to select things in Photoshop a lot easier. So yeah, keep that in mind when you're exporting. I'm using Photoshop 2024, or you can use the latest beta version of Photoshop, which is quite useful because that has the latest AI capabilities. So once you open Photoshop, you want to load in all the layers from Lumion and put them into a group. So to begin with, I've used the alpha channel here to select the black areas and use the Photoshop Generative Fill. If you're not aware, Generative Fill is a AI tool that allows you to generate based on text input. You can also leave the input empty and that will get rid of whatever is there, and it sort of self-interprets what should be there. What I generally do is whenever you're selecting something, to always expand the selection area to encompass more than what you actually see, because this will allow you to have a better blending between the two layers. AI can fill the area, like extend the landscape, replace specific elements, and if you leave it blank, as I've mentioned, it will replace and it will interpret what should be there. AI beta from version 25 allows you to upload a reference image, which can be very useful because you can tell it exactly what sort of output you want. So it will use the reference image to give you similar outputs. But for this tutorial, I've used the older version, which is the Photoshop 2024. Generally, the generative fill does try to match your lighting, the style, the focal length sometimes, and it also matches the coloring. The text is currently not great, but if you do want to generate any text outputs, you can use Illustrator for that because that's more designed for graphic design. So from this point, I export to Krea. So I just do a regular JPEG export from Photoshop. And what Krea is basically one website that allows you to upscale images. Krea does allow you to upscale for free, but it's limited to, I think it's 1080p. But if you do pay a little bit more, then you'll be able to export to 4K and 8K. But I do want to point out that the higher quality you try to export, the more weird the image gets. For example, if you do export it at 8K, AI starts to have a little bit more interpretation of what the image is, and it starts to look a little bit fake. So I tend to just stick to around 4K when I upscale images. Krea automatically generates the description for you, so what I'd recommend is do check the description of the image because it might interpret things slightly differently, so you want to just check that in case. So once I upscale the image, I take it back into Photoshop and I mask out some of the areas that I don't want to retain. So because Krea sometimes over exaggerates certain things, or it might get rid of detail that I do want to keep. So that's when I bring it back into Photoshop and I blend the areas that I actually want to keep. Lumion can do water reflections, but not necessarily with sea very much, I've noticed. If you do use like a standard water plane. It does do a bit of reflection, but I prefer to use the sea because I get to see the waves and so on. And so that's where AI can help me generate those reflections instead of having to rely on the Lumion lack of reflections for the sea. So that's pretty much the process. I applied the same sort of principle to all the other images. It's always good to work with all the tools that we have available. I mean, from the point of the release of this video, I'm sure there'll be other tools that you can use, but generally I do try to use Photoshop to overlay layers of information that may give me better results in some parts of the image. So it's always good to mask out the areas that you need and the ones that you don't. But that's pretty much it. It's essentially images generated from Lumion with a bit of help of Photoshop, Generative Fill, and Krea. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you have any thoughts or comments below.